Well, the day has finally come. Jaime Jaquez Jr. is no longer a Bruin. Let's talk about it on Locked On UCLA.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Locked On UCLA. I'm your host, Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for tuning in to this episode, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. You can make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Thanks for making this your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. So like, comment, and subscribe over there. Let's get locked and loaded. The big news coming out of the last day on Thursday, April 6th, Jaime Jaquez Jr. announced the news that we all seemingly expected, that he was declaring for the draft. And to give some more clarity, I was looking up things he was talking about when making his decision. He posted, I believe, on Instagram, whatever his social media was, and said, "Thanks for my time." I think it was even on Twitter, the graphic, everything. "I love being a Bruin. I wanted to come here and be a UCLA player that brought UCLA back into the conversation in college basketball. Wanted to win a national championship this year." But even as he quoted, and it's just about many UCLA fans could get the feeling, especially as the year wore on, this was his last year. And, normally you don't get 5 years. COVID made things weird, and he played generally 4 full seasons, coming from a guy who had to earn his way to playing time, to being a number 8 all-time scorer in UCLA history, averaging about 16, 17 points per game all-time in all his tournament games. So it's nice to see the Lute Olson National Player of the Year award winner, consensus All-American, Pac-12 Player of the Year, first one for the Bruins in 15 years since Kevin Love. He was able to get up the lists and all the charts and rebounds, points, whatever. Everything he did was to be a champion Bruin. But the biggest thing is he's just the latest domino to fall for UCLA moving forward to look at next year's team in 2023 and 24, which is funny because maybe after we saw Charisma Osborne come back an extra year for UCLA women, one might have thought, well, Jaime Jaquez Jr. has his sister on the women's team. Maybe he wants to stay one more year, had the family around. But just the way he went about it, his mannerisms, which weren't bad whatsoever, but it was, my next step is to live out my dream in the NBA, where he is projected, according to the ESPN rankings, to be a 34th overall pick. That's about early second round, which would not be a bad thing for him. I mean, how much higher can your draft stock get, right? Averaging about nearly 18 points per game, nearly 8 rebounds per game. You're a conference player of the year. You led the Bruins to the conference title game, or to a conference title, tournament championship game in the Pac-12 conference, getting to the Sweet 16, but only having injuries derail your season, and eventually have him show that he was healthy. Speaking of injuries, last year he was so hurt. This year he proved he could play through anything and he was a lot healthier. So his draft stock probably wouldn't get any higher than coming out now. Maybe he could get a hefty sum from an NIL deal, maybe the family, but just the way you saw his dad hug Mick Cronin on senior day and everything in between, it really felt like this is the last ride for Jaquez. And when you've got all these things building up, and it's different for Tiger Campbell, which we'll touch on in a minute, Jaquez maybe has more to lose by staying the extra year if he truly wants to live out his NBA dream. I know there's the family and everything, but sometimes it's like, all right, little sister, we had our year together, senior, freshman, that was fun, but I'm going to go to the NBA and make that step to the next level, because he was a very underrated Bruin. Maybe in years in the future, he might be an underrated Bruin all time, especially because the Bruins didn't end up winning a national championship in his tenure, but he could be thought of as maybe one of those key figures that helped UCLA get back in the conversation, which is what he was quoted saying. He said, "I knew this was my last year at UCLA coming in. It never crossed my mind returning. I wanted to do everything I could to win a national championship, but I'm proud of everything we accomplished in my 4 years here." And he talked about, hey, like, it was rough when I was in high school. My goal at UCLA when enrolling was never personal accolades. These are still quotes from Jaime Jaquez Jr. It was to restore UCLA to basketball conversations. When I was growing up, there were some down years. I wanted to propel the program back in the right direction. I didn't think I would be in this position when I graduated, which means, one, UCLA was at a Final Four, Sweet 16s, probably could have made 4 consecutive tournaments, depending on how the COVID season would have gone. And he was a part of a Final Four run, Sweet 16 teams getting into the top 5, top 2. You know, he was a guy that helped reload this UCLA basketball program alongside with the coming of Mick Cronin. So it's nice to see how Jaquez he was perfect. It was a good fit. He was he was a good leader. He's a vocal leader. He really showed what it took, and he was a good fit for what Mick Cronin was trying to bring to this program in reestablishing it after the tail end years from Ben Howland into Steve Alford and then now to Mick Cronin. Because you can't say UCLA is not better off than before Mick Cronin and Jaime Jaquez Jr. They all had their key parts in this. And the biggest thing is now, a piece we expected to go is gone. Maybe there's a minuscule chance you thought that Jaime Jaquez Jr. would come back and play that extra year, and we'd have one fun extra ride, and everybody would come back. But it seems like, while Jaquez didn't say anything about an agent, he's saying, I'm done. I'm going to the draft. Now, unless something super crazy changes in the draft combine in mid-May in Chicago with the May 31st deadline, we're not thinking he's coming back. Clark left the door open, and now the decisions fall in the laps of Tiger Campbell, who is a little bit different because his NBA prospects may not be, or his pro prospects may not be as loved or as, highly targeted, highly coveted as one Jaime Jaquez Jr., who understands what his role will be at the next level. Campbell could come back, get that NIL deal, maybe get more, add degrees to degrees for Campbell, who would be there for 6 years. And then you've got Amari Bailey and Adem Bona. And the continual word from Bona, especially reading from what Ben Bolch just put in the LA Times and everything, we still don't know the extent of the shoulder injury. So he might come back another year despite NBA-ready athleticism and the ability to play defense. Amari Bailey had that surge. Was it enough to get him high enough up the draft charts? Does he simply want to go, or does he want to be the man for a year and then play? And then the next thing is, all right, here is Jaime Jaquez Jr. Chris Ledlum, the Harvard grad transfer, is someone UCLA talked to early. That was reported, and I've talked about it already. He's the guy that fits the same size and frame of Jaquez, same kind of shooting numbers, scoring numbers, rebounding numbers out of Harvard for Ledlum. And he could definitely fill a role in a one-year stopgap while UCLA develops some of the freshmen from this year into next. And then Mick Cronin can try and have a much better recruiting cycle in the 24 class, right? Because this class of 23, kind of interesting. They missed on El Marco Jackson. They missed on the kid who went to USC. They missed on a lot of guys down the stretch recruiting for this year, whether it be Stojakovic, it's just Marcus Adams Jr., who's between a 24 to a 23 class. Mick Cronin, while they're talking to the kid from France, I forget his name off the top of my head, but there hasn't been true crazy reports that I'm going to write home about, but there's been a lot of talk of them talking to him. We'll see if they bring him in late like they did at Bramo Zonka. At the moment, UCLA now has to hit the portal, right? None of the freshmen they're bringing in will replace Jaime Jaquez Jr., and nobody coming back is going to replace the production. Amari Bailey will do things, but in a different way if he comes back. Adem Bona can get more rebounds depending on how healthy he is, but that's different. Tiger Campbell can do different things, but that just depends on what he is going forward. He's a point guard. So Ledlum is the biggest maybe fit size-wise, skill-wise, and depending on what guys in the portal they're talking to, Ledlum is maybe the early fit to replace a Jaquez role for a one-year stopgap opportunity. But the big thing is we salute Jaime Jaquez Jr. Maybe we'll have a countdown to our favorite Jaquez moments. Then we're not doing that right now. In the end, Jaquez declares to the NBA draft. The Bruins, for the moment, have lost 2, and we'll see if they lose more to the NBA draft in the coming days. We've seen the Tiger Campbell post kind of mentioning, hey, maybe to Dylan Andrews, it's your time. So maybe he's moving on. Bailey and Bona have been, for the most part, pretty silent. We'll see how those things materialize in the next coming weeks, because they got to decide if they got to go to NBA workouts, hire agents, NCAA certified agents. Those are all questions we have to talk about going forward. But Hawk is gone, Clark is gone, and the Bruins will look vastly different in 2023 to 2024. In the meantime, we're going to talk a little bit UCLA football, talking spring, the high praise Chip Kelly's been given, a lot of up-tempo. What does this mean for the Bruins moving forward with some of the new staffers, players, and who may be standing out through the first couple of days in practice? But first, we're going to tell you about FanDuel. Because the NBA playoffs are here, or just around the corner, literally, it's time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. It's a no-sweat first bet. You can get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you're a new customer and if your first bet doesn't win. So you should go to the FanDuel Sportsbook app, download it. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can get bigger bets, bigger payouts on same-game parlays from money lines, point scores, threes made in NBA games. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get your no sweat first bet. Get bonus bets back if you're a new customer. All you have to do is make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner and official sports betting partner of the NBA, and with us here at Locked On. Cruising into segment 2 of Locked On UCLA, well, let's talk some UCLA football because, hey, why not? Spring practice, 2 practices in the book. They got a third one coming up over the weekend on April 8th when pads officially head to toe will be suited up. They've been going shorts. Now let's get ready to talk about what's going on. So here's some things that Chip Kelly had to say to the LA Times over his finally granted an interview talking about, all right, what did the first practice look like? What really stood out? And one of the biggest things reading from the LA Times, Steve Henson, because Ben Bolts couldn't be out there, just seeing the different things, how much he lauded the ability and the skill of Carson Steele, which makes you think Steele is the headliner and the potential starter, right? Steele is maybe looked at, the Ball State transfer, as the guy now to replace Zach Charbonnet as the starting back, that physical beast that can break tackles, get rushing yards, right? Chip Kelly maybe was a little misquoted in saying like he's the leading rusher returning back in one of the top 2 returning backs. Well, he is one of the top 2 returning backs. He was, I think, number 2 in terms of returners with rushing yards. And then I think he's number 2 or tied for number 2 or 1 in terms of in the country with breaking tackles. He broke about 34 he forced 34 missed tackles, or had 33. Bijan Johnson had 1 more. 1,500 rushing yards in the MAC. And it was kind of joked in the LA Times article about how the UCLA coaches would have staffer meetings on those Tuesdays and Thursdays during MACtion, if you will, during those MAC midweek games on Tuesdays and Thursday nights on the national television scale. But here, Chip Kelly was just high praise, talking about, hey, all the other guys are going to the NFL who have this skill set. He's coming over here, and he is ready to make a big impact. And that doesn't include Harden or Keegan Jones or anybody who might step up that we're not ready for. But Steele, even coming over from the MAC, they were still impressed, talking about, hey, this is a guy who is really good, despite him playing in what is quote-unquote a mid-major, a group of 5, whatever is not a power 5, right? This is a guy who came in, and as Chip Kelly said, a tough, hard-nosed physical player. So when we lost Zach Charbonnet, it was a priority to get another back that really replicated that physical tenacity, sheer will to run the football down your throats. And he said, I think in this day and age, you've got to look at the portal. And the big thing I think he loves, and this is what Chip Kelly does, the nutrition, the strength training, everything in between. He talked about Carson Steele's just an absolute beast in the weight room with an unbelievable work ethic. And for someone who's got a pet alligator, pet croc, I believe, got the long blonde locks, I think we're all going to love him as UCLA fans moving forward, and he'll fit in quite nicely. And will he take over that role of Zach Charbonnet? Charbonnet was extremely dominant. And if he played every game and wasn't held out those couple of games, or the bowl game and a couple of games he sat out, he probably would have led the country in rushing, or even be a higher top, more coveted prospect, despite being what looks to be an early second round NFL draft pick for Charbonnet. But the big thing was, how would UCLA replace DTR? How would they replace the likes of Zach Charbonnet? Any receiving options? Of course, Jake Bobo was a 1-year stopgap, but they wanted more elite receivers. They needed some depth at the tight end room. You can talk at the offensive line. They've started to do that. They did that through the transfer portal. But the big thing is, when you get someone who excites Chip Kelly so much to talk about things and even get a couple of stats wrong as to how good he is in terms of returners and how good Chip Kelly is saying, that's a guy who's got some skill in the portal. I'm going to go get him right now and must have them in Westwood and playing in Pasadena in the Rose Bowl. Carson Steele fit the bill. Hardworking, the good work ethic, extremely strong, and the physical beast in the backfield that Chip Kelly truly desires. And when you lose something like a Charbonnet, or you go from a Josh Kelly, even Britton Brown was kind of a strong, beefy back, right? You want to keep having that tradition, right? You got to have your change of pace backs, your speed, which Chip Kelly has always been known to have at Oregon. But the guys who truly did really well under Chip Kelly's system, having a strong, sometimes underrated running back. And here's Carson Steele, who's put up numbers already, ready to prove it here in the spring practices. So that's important there. In the meantime, we're going to take a brief break. We'll be like, all right, let's talk more football. And we're going to wrap up the show after some ads if you're listening. In the meantime here, we're going to segment 3 of Locked On UCLA because we're going to talk more football today. What are other things that have been noticed in the UCLA spring practice? Well, for the defensive players under D'Anton Lynn, when you're not putting on pads and you're not going, there's thud, there's whiz, there's, full tackle. And if you don't really know what those are, thud, you play to contact, whiz, you go past them, no contact. So that's the difference between what these guys can do or won't do in spring practice and why the lack of a spring game is, one, bad for the publicity and getting the fans to go see a Dante Moore, go see a Carson Steele, go see why Dante Moore is not starting if Garbers is playing better, or get the fans talking about why this guy should start or is not. But the thing is, UCLA on the Saturday practice is moving into the likes of full pads. And the big thing is what Chip Kelly's already starting is these up-tempo practices, right? Drills, only 5 to 15 minutes. I talked about this a long time ago. He went to a coaching clinic and he's like, how do I coach these guys in this day and age? Even I'm a young guy. How do you get their attention spans to sit there for more than a few minutes at a time? Well, you do it in short bursts, right? He's talked about this before. I believe it was a viral video about him talking at coaching clinics. Hey, it's short bursts. Drills are only 5 to 15 minutes. This is how quick the offense has got to be. We're going to just load it in short bursts. And he talked about in his time at UCLA, this is the largest roster or one of the largest rosters he's had for spring practice. Well, the last couple of years prior to 2022 have been somewhat affected and having to deal with the likes of the COVID pandemic going into 2020, going into 2021. So that's a little different. But finally, he's got a full repertoire. Guys, they moved up the transfer portal date from May to April, I believe. So there's still guys who could transfer out after spring practice, see what they're headed, and go head to another school. And while UCLA's already done the bulk of bringing guys in, there are guys who are going to come in, practice, get ready, see where they stand, and probably still have a chance to leave after they finish their spring quarter credits and move on to another school, or need to graduate before they move on while still getting some football repertoires in, getting some football reps in, I should say. So the big thing is, even Logan Loya, who was interviewed after practice the other day, talking about, hey, the tempo is super fast. And it's talking about getting everybody reps, right? You saw how many receivers are coming back. Who is going to step up? Tight ends, there's the veterans. Then you've got the likes of the transfers. Same thing with the running backs, quarterbacks. You've got 4 quarterbacks Chip Kelly is rotating in. How is he going to get all these guys real reps, get guys understanding the offense, and see with true game-like speed and talent and quality who is going to stand out in the fall of 2023? And the big thing is, he says, you've got to get a lot of guys reps, right? We learn by doing, and we only get 15 opportunities to do this. So we've got to be really structured and efficient in how to do it. And if there's something about structure and efficiency, especially reps offensively, one would think Chip Kelly knows how to do this and get his team ready going forward. And the big thing is, how do you prepare for the game-like speed that he does? You started in the spring, off-season workouts. You showcase the speed in April. You might not be in full pads, but that is how you prepare your team to get going with all that. And then one final thing I want to leave you guys is how we've already talked Ken Niumatalolo. You probably read about him coming over. He's technically the director of leadership. And if you don't even understand what that means, UCLA literally created a position just to bring Ken Niumatalolo, the former Navy coach, to be a leader of men, leader of this football program in a way that he can't technically coach players on the field, but he can have the ability to spend time with them in meetings, make an impact in the locker room. So basically, he's a leader off the field, telling them, hey, these are things we can do in the meetings. He can't stand there on the sideline and coach. So you're not going to see Niumatalolo go coach and be impactful. And how the fact that UCLA saw that he was let go by Navy, to some surprisingly, to others, who knows, after the 2022 football season. And he said, all right, he talked to the UCLA administrators, coming together. How can we get this man to be a part of our staff? He was a guy UCLA targeted. And I know they've already made quite a few different coaching staff changes. The defensive coordinator, with D'Anton Lynn being the biggest switch due to the lack of health from Bill McGovern, getting some youth, but having a veteran leader, someone who led a military service academies football team and to some success, to various degrees of success, lots of success. That's a man who knows how to be a leader. And he's, even during this offseason, gone and done a lot of leadership coaching clinics, going to the state of Utah coaching clinics. I believe he was at BYU giving more coaching clinics, and just, he loves to be around the game. And he actually turned down more offers to come to UCLA and be the director of leadership and try and teach a lot of these guys, because last year UCLA was one of the oldest rosters in the country, one of the older rosters they've ever had with the COVID and everybody using that extra year in 2022. Now in 2023, a lot of newcomers. What's it going to mean to step up? We're going in this last year of the Pac-12, but then moving to the Big Ten. What are the mindset changes? How do you prepare your body for a full season? And then how do you prepare it moving into the next year and all those things? So just showing, hey, Niumatalolo will make an impact. And this is what Chip Kelly had to say about Niumatalolo. For a man who was 109 and 83 in 15 seasons at Navy. And the other reason that he was brought over is his son, Ali, is a offensive line graduate assistant. So a former Utah player coaching somewhat on the UCLA staff. That was the connection too, that Chip Kelly said, hey, I've got your son on staff. Let's bring you over because I know what type of guy you are. Because he said, you're talking about the foremost man who can teach leadership. He did it at the Naval Academy. What freshman has to do to lead is different than what a senior has to do, and really break it down and have a person who can foster that mentality with their players and then meet with them one-on-one. We are excited about it. Those are Chip Kelly's words, talking about, hey, what's it like to be Dante Moore if you're leading as a freshman quarterback versus Garbers, who's been a guy that's been behind the scenes if he's the starting quarterback, or if you're Colin Schlee, who if he somehow steps back into the race and jumps in, or if you're Justin Martin. These are all quarterback options. But in this day and age of football, quarterbacks are significant in the success of a football team, especially high school, college, at the NFL level. It's significant, even though Chip Kelly likes to run the football as well. A quarterback's demeanor and leadership. And while there's so many guys who need to be leaders on this team, whether it be a veteran receiver, a big-time defensive player, quarterbacks are just a key component and just one example of where what's it going to look like? What's the team going to look like leadership-wise if you have a true freshman leading? If you have an say Justin Martin goes crazy. And these are just all examples off the top of my head and not saying that's actually going to happen. But if Martin wins, that's unexpected. He was number 4 in the depth chart, potentially coming in to this spring practice. What if he wins? Or Schleed, a new guy, or Garbers, who's been here, and now he's got to be more of a vocal leader. Those are things and ideas where I think Chip Kelly is going with bringing Niumatalolo in, because he's not stepping on the field and bringing the X's and O's. We're not trying to bring the triple option in here. It's how do we develop these guys both on and off the field. And Niumatalolo, whether it's a 1-year or a 2-year thing, depending on how long his son is on staff, or if they really gel with Chip Kelly, it just depends for Niumatalolo and the Bruins. This seems like a perfect fit, adding to developing these guys both on the field, which all we care about is generally the results on the field. But in the end, what do these men look like? What do these players become after they leave UCLA? That's also a determining factor, an important thing that college coaches still have to deal with and try and help these players grow for both life now in pads on the gridiron, and then afterwards, and take those life lessons with them until the end of days, right? That's the biggest thing for these UCLA guys. And no, yes, we're getting very philosophical, very deep at the end of this Locked On UCLA podcast, but it's all right. The Bruins, it's spring practice. They're putting on more pads. They're getting excited. And it's just around the corner. We're going to talk more baseball, basketball news, football, everything in between, even talk more guys as to who's going in the portal and who can replace everybody. Max will be back. We're all excited. And we'll talk about that more on Locked On UCLA. In the meantime, UCLA fans, go check out Locked On College Basketball. Make that your second listen. A good show to wrap up college basketball. But I'm Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer saying so long. It's time to get up for that 8-clap, baby. Hands up, Bruins fans. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Go Bruins.